إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبد الله ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا ونصلي ونسلم على النبي الأمي في الأولين وفي الآخرين وفي الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. عباد الله، أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله عز وجل كما جاء في محكم التنزيل: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. Brothers and sisters, we always begin our day, we begin our valuable speech with the praise and gratitude of our beloved Creator, Provider and Sustainer. And we recognize that the biggest blessing that He has afforded us is to be guided, to understand the divinely lit up, illuminated path that would make our straight path back to Him very clear and easy. That is the biggest blessing. And today we want to talk about an historical example of the rise and fall of Muslims. And I hope that we can look at ourselves and where we're at right now and draw parallels and attempt to see what role are we playing in being part of the solution. In our history, in the Muslim world, mashallah, we have 14 centuries of history now. As far as that should not be misunderstood. Some people think that Islam started with Muhammad, and we don't believe that, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Islam started with Adam and Eve. The first human beings were told, submit to your Lord, He's one, avoid taghut and all of the evil and corruption. And all the prophets taught that same thing. The belief was one. The laws might have different for time or place, but the religion is the same, Islam. So since the finality of that revelation in coming to Muhammad ﷺ in the Arab Peninsula 14 centuries ago, our history is very rich. It's rich with so many great things. But also there were downtimes, and we now find ourselves in a downtime. So I thought it would behoove us to take a look at one of the parts of our history that isn't highlighted very much. And particularly because of the nationalistic movement in some Muslim countries, it's actually hidden from the view of the common Muslim in learning. And that is basically towards the middle portion of the Abbasid Caliphate. So to give you a simple review, there was Khulafa Rashidin. For 30 years after the Prophet ﷺ, there were 4 great pious leaders: Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Ali radiallahu anhum ajma'in. Those leaders were leading with the exact example and style and inspiration of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's very interesting to note that all of them were pretty much democratically or republicly elected. Then after that, after Muawiyah took control, his family, Bani Umayyah, formed the Umayyad dynasty, or the Umayyad kingdom, if you will. It was a caliphate because Islam was the dominant reality. There was a theocracy. Islam was the focus. But still, it had become a hand-me-down, king from son, and not necessarily from pious, righteous rule. That became the standard. So the Umayyads led for around a couple centuries, and then towards the end of their reign there came the Abbasids, which was a group of Muslims who come from Abdullah bin Abbas's lineage. and which was the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, and they called their authority from the barakah of the family of the Prophet ﷺ. But they were Sunni, they were Orthodox Muslims. Because they were having the love of the family of the Prophet ﷺ, the group that had developed called Shia were with them in the beginning. But then they turned on them later, because when they had full control, they announced that, we do not believe in some of these practices that the people called Shia are doing. So the Abbasid were Orthodox. After 3 centuries of their rule, coming into the 4th century of their rule, basically the Abbasid dynasty became weak, religiously and from the leadership and military perspective. And in this, there were some groups, that Shiite groups, that took actually control over the whole ummah. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but in Eastern Islamic Empire, the Eastern Islamic Empire, there was the Shiite dynasty in the Arabic Buwayhiya, which in English they call that the Buyid dynasty. And they were a Shiite group that had full control, pretty much an influence over Iraq, Iran, southeastern Turkey, Afghanistan, this whole Mecca, Medina, this whole area. And then in southern Syria and Egypt and North Africa, there was the Fatimiyya, or the Fatimide dynasty, that were all Shia. So basically in the year 1050, basically the Muslim world is dominated by the Shiite philosophy. So during this time, one of the newer areas of Muslim growth was what is modern day called Turkmenistan. It is basically a Turco-Persian group of Turkish people that had embraced Islam. And these people started to grow in their understanding, and some of the great tabi'een and tabi'een were the teachers and founders of that area, some of the great scholars. And these people were called Seljuks. And so these Seljuks, they became very spiritual and very devoted, and they heard the news of the state of the ummah. And one of the things that bothered them greatly was that they heard of the Shiite practice of cursing and reviling the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, to the extent that the Abbasids felt like they were not able to establish scholarly or military authority to stop them from, in the public, cursing people like Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhum ajma'in. And so the Seljuks talked with many of the ulama that were very humble and reserved, and they made the edict. They said, those who say that, their punishment is death. Because this goes against various verses in the Quran, in which God says that the pleasure and contentment of God is upon the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. So there arose a man in this Seljuk group. His name was Tughril. Tughril was basically a born leader. He commanded respect by his wisdom, by his thought, by his interaction. He was an intellectual type, but he was also deeply spiritual and motivated by his knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah. So Tughril made this basically shura, consultation with many of the people in the Seljuk world, and he gathered a large army. And these Seljuks came into Baghdad in the year 1055, and they basically took out the leadership of the Shia. And within 3 years after that, they basically toppled the whole entire Buyid Shiite influence upon the Muslim. So those remnants of the grandchildren of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ and the people from Iraq and Mecca and Medina had no ability to do this. But these Turkish people devoted to Quran and Sunnah and looking for the well-being of what Islam is and how it's presented and the state of the ummah, they were able to remove this. So when this happened, there was a Khalifa at the time. There still is Abbasid Khalifa. His name was Al-Qa'im bi Amrillah. And so he was amazed to watch this happen, and so he called for Tughril and his main followers and military advisors to come to his court in Baghdad. And then he made a huge testimony to authenticating and now bringing the Seljuk as a dynasty that is basically the military and religious wing of the Abbasid Caliphate. And he called Tughril Rukn ad-Din, and he called for all of the Khuthbah, the people who are giving the Friday sermon, to give their respect to the resurgence of Islam in its orthodox, authentic ways, and the removal of the corrupt ideas and practices of some of the Shiites that had become dominant. And so basically Tughril now became a dominant force, and towards the end of this time, basically Tughril became known as the military head and the basically spokesperson for the Abbasid Caliphate. Al-Qa'im bi-Amrillah was the caliph who accepted this role from a father or an uncle. But he was not a strong leader by any means. So through this time, basically this Seljuk military and religious resurgence in the Muslim world, now you have the Abbasid Caliphate became relevant, and it became something of respect in the world. And so Tughril, as a person, just to know who he was someone that would wake up and lead the Fajr prayers in any mosque that he entered by the command of the people. Why is he doing this? Because he memorized the entire Quran. He was a person who was known for spending all of his wealth on the poor. He was praying in the night. He was a person of remembrance. He encouraged this in his companions. He was very much concerned about the spiritual state because he felt that that was dependent upon the quote-unquote secular state of the ummah. He said his idea was that the state of the Muslim world will be either respected and dignified and strong because of its religious practice, or it will fall and be humiliated because of its lack thereof. That was Tughril's philosophy, and his philosophy proved to be true. So after about 8 years of his role in leadership and unifying the Muslim world, Tughril passed away in Ramadan, rahimahullah ta'ala rahmatan wasi'ah. So after Tughril died, then there was a nephew of his named Alp Arslan. Alp Arslan, the meaning of this actual Turkish phrase is the courageous lion. And the reason was because, number one, he was also a great leader that commanded respect just by presence. If you met him, you would respect him just by the way he looked and acted and interacted with you. And it wasn't a harsh leadership. It was a haiba. It was a respected character and reverence that he carried. And number two, he was the leader of all of the battles, somewhat like a Hamza ibn Abi Muttalib radiallahu ta'ala anhu type, where he would not fear being at the front of the battle even though he is the leader. The general of the army, he would be in the front and would come out with some damage, but he would not be killed. So they called him the courageous lion. So Alp Arslan now became the Sultan of the Seljuk dynasty. And so basically Alp Arslan is working with Al-Qa'im bi-Amrillah, and they're establishing this relationship, and now the ummah is really starting to have some stability in its rule. Alp Arslan nominated a man named Nizam al-Mulk, which was his vizier. And I'm saying vizier because they speak Turkish and the waw is like that. I don't know if you've ever met a Turkish person, but you'll notice that in the Persian and the Turkish dialect. So this was like his political head, because Alp Arslan, he himself was not a big politician. He wasn't someone that was very good about politically running things. He was good about establishing security in the ummah. And he had an ambition to unify the ummah, and he had an ambition that he notified the Fatimid neighbors that they will lose their rule if they continue in their corrupt, un-Quranic like beliefs and practices. And he also took control over modern day Azerbaijan and Armenia and Georgia, and actually Alp Arslan took back Quds for the first time after the Abbasids had lost it. He took back Palestine and Syria from the Byzantine Empire. So during this time, basically, we have a merger that took place through the custom of the time, which was that there was an intermarrying between the family of the Seljuks and the family of Qa'im bi-Amrillah. And so the brothers and sisters that married, they had children, and now this became a precedent for the future reality of the Sultanate. So Alp Arslan was also very spiritual. He was a very deeply concerned person about the poor. And so he set a standard of removing all of these taxes that the Abbasids had, which were higher than zakat for Muslims and higher than jizya for non-Muslims. And he said this is completely unacceptable in Islam. So the Abbasids tried to argue with Alp Arslan and tell him, but we need this power. He said, look at this palace you have. Look at what you're doing with these people's wealth. Look at the mentality that he had. He said, you should take their wealth by haqq, by right, as is in the Quran and the Sunnah. The Muslims pay a zakat, which is an obligation, and the non-Muslims, citizens of the state, pay a jizya, which is their obligation. You cannot oblige them more than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam did. And so then Nizam al-Mulk, his wazir, became the enforcer of this policy, and he became very strongly concerned about the economic development and the unity of the empire. And basically all the governors lost their lofty positions of, you know, having silk clothes and gold and women and these things that they had. The Abbasids had lost their way, basically. And you found that alcohol and things like that became commonplace with them. So Nizam al-Mulk and Alp Arslan completely removed this stuff from the Muslim world. Now Islam became now once again the rule of law. And no one was above it. If you're a leader and you committed a crime, Alp Arslan would have you jailed and imprisoned and possibly punished in front of the people as an example. Bringing back that Khilafah al-Rashida vibe that Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu was so famous for. So basically, after Syria and Palestine was taken back, the Byzantine Empire had a ruler. Their Caesar's name was Romanos IV. And Romanos IV, when he heard about this Alp Arslan, and the name became now commonplace in the Roman Empire. Who is this Alp Arslan guy? He is setting the stage for the world. So Romanos IV called for what he claimed is written in all the history books, the largest army ever to be built. I want the largest gathering of forces to destroy this Alp Arslan. Now why is he trying to destroy him? He's establishing justice and fair, good means and so forth. And their empire in the quote-unquote Christian world is just like the Abbasids had started to become in the Muslim world, where there's corruption and the rulers and the wealthy people are taking advantage of the poor and the weak, and there is no justice, and there's all of this corruption. But because the idea is now the Muslims are being seen as the great, powerful, dignified moral authority, we're going to destroy them. That was the intention of Romanos IV. So according to some narrations, his army was over 200,000, others just over 100,000. And so basically there arose this conflict. And so with Alp Arslan at the time was in Baghdad, when the eastern area. Do we know where this sound is coming from? We're going to have to help the brother, you know, who's... Okay. Yeah, there's a concept called amana in Islam. Amana is to be responsible for the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and responsible for the rights of those around you. So we should always be conscious and aware of that reality and make sure that we do not become a disservice to our environment in our trust and responsibility to those around us. So at any rate, going back to this big army that they built. So they built this giant army, and they said we're gonna. So they started to push back, and they won two major battles. Two major blows were dealt by this giant army to take back Palestine, Syria, and to push the Muslims back across the Euphrates on the southeast or the southeastern side of Turkey and so forth. So Alp Arslan went. And he went to the villages, the garrison towns around that area, and he talked with the scholars, and he made almost a whole day of dua on the member. He just made dua. He's just making dua in front of everybody for the Muslims to be safe and for the injustices of these invaders to stop. And so he talked with the scholars, and they said, well, let's wait till Jum'ah, let's make khutbahs all about establishing our right and our dignity and preserving our lands, and they did. So 30,000 Muslims went out against this 100,000+ army and completely destroyed them. And in the middle of the battle, thousands of the Turkish soldiers that were on the Byzantine side defected to the Muslim side to be with their ethnic counterparts. And so that was dealt a major blow morale-wise to the Byzantines. And so basically, in this battle, an unprecedented reality in most of the history of empires, the Muslims actually captured Romanos IV. In the 1,000 years of the Byzantine Empire history before the Muslims, when they were fighting with Persians beforehand, right, there were many battles. But never was it ever heard of that the actual emperor himself was taken captive by the enemy. And so this is a very strange precedent in history. So the Muslims brought Romanos IV to Alp Arslan. And Alp Arslan, whenever he met with him, he asked him, he said, "What would you do if you have captured me?" And he said, "I will torture you and maybe have you dragged around the streets, and then I will have you killed or crucified or something like that." And he said, "What do you think I'm going to do with you?" And he said, "Well, you might probably do the same to me, or you might ransom me away." Maybe he's trying to suggest something, you know, you might ransom me off. And he said, "As a matter of fact, we know you have a lot of wealth over there, and we need wealth. So I was intending to ransom you from point one." And he actually ransomed him for 1,500,000 gold dinars, which is like $1 billion today. I mean, it was huge. And they were willing to give it. His intention was not to destroy the Byzantine Empire. His intention was to look for the benefit of the Muslims in the state that they are, to serve them. Not about my power versus your power and I'll kill you. That wasn't the attitude that he had. Although that was the attitude that Romanos himself admitted that he had. Right? So then he made sujood al-shukr in front of everybody right there. And then he let this Romanos to go back to his land. And so this basically, as many of the historians write it, was the beginning of the end of the Byzantine Empire. And so basically after this, because then the Muslims later would take back Palestine and these areas until the Western Roman Empire, the Roman Empire, came with the Crusades, then there was no influence of the Eastern Roman Empire. So let's take a look at Alp Arslan. What was his character? What was his values? He was soft-hearted with those who require a soft heart. And he was very tough with those who required a tough heart. So if poor people or oppressed people would beseech Arslan's help, or those that he had given authority, he would be very merciful, compassionate. He would never walk by poor people without crying and trying to do something for their cause and understanding their situation. He was very much concerned about that. Similarly, he was concerned about the citizens of the state, and he empowered Nizam al-Mulk to be going around, traveling constantly, looking at the affairs of the Muslims and reporting. Something that the Abbasids had not done in over centuries. This is now the concept of we're the rulers, we are responsible in service of the people. That idea had completely gone away. It was just palaces and so forth that they had. So in 1072, a prisoner was brought before Alp Arslan. He was calling for a revolt in modern day southeastern Turkey against Alp Arslan. So they brought him to the court, and he broke free from the soldiers, and he started to come towards Alp. So Alp, because he was very noted for his archery and his skill, he felt the vanity hit him, and so he basically said, you know, he motioned to the guards, "Don't get him." He pulled his arrow, and then when he came down, his foot slipped. He missed him, and the guy stabbed him right in the chest and put the death blow on him. So that night, Alp Arslan is lying on his deathbed in deep pain, and he called his son Malik Shah. He called him over. He said, "Look, my miserable reality right now is because of pride and vanity. I have these guards who are dedicated to my cause that are surrounding me day and night. And they could have easily stopped this assassin. And I was so proud of my ability in archery that I was taught a lesson by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So take heed of this lesson, Malik Shah, as you will probably become the Sultan after me." And he passed away. So basically on his grave it says, "O those who saw the sky-high grandeur of Alp Arslan, know that he is now under the black soil," which is carrying on with humility. You know, many leaders when they die, they put some amazing thing, and this was the will that he left, that the people would see of a true leader. So Malik Shah was his son. His son at this time is a teenager. And he became the sultan because that was the way of thinking of the people. Okay, his son, he's the one that's going to inherit from his father this great authority. But his son heeded the words of his father on his deathbed. And so whenever he was given this right, he called forth Nizam al-Mulk, who is a man in his 50s, who is well established as a very knowledgeable, experienced politician and leader. And he said, هَذَا هُوَ الْأَمِيرُ الْوَالِدُ. I am naming this man the fatherly prince of this ummah. He is my right hand. He is the full authority that you should respect and honor. And so Nizam al-Mulk was known to be one that encouraged scholarship. And Malik Shah was a student of the sciences. Malik Shah was very well versed in mathematics, in science, in medicine, in literature, tasteful literature, as opposed to some of the corruption that was before their time. And so basically Malik Shah and Nizam al-Mulk started a revolution in the Muslim world, an educational revolution. Basically they started opening up centers of learning in mosques and in areas all throughout the ummah. And they made education the primary goal. And Nizam al-Mulk used to always have the great scholars visiting with him. And he used to always go visit them and take their advice. And he used to seek the knowledge of hadith, and he narrated some hadith in the chains of hadith. And so he encouraged Islamic scholarship, and he encouraged that to be balanced with the worldly knowledge. And so they started a great tradition of a balance between worldly sciences and the guidance of Islamic sciences, which tell you to think and contemplate and ponder, and seeking knowledge is so valuable. So they resurrected that part that had been basically dying for the last 2 centuries. And so they, through the time of Malik Shah and Nizam al-Mulk, the Islamic State was returned to its greatness and its dignity, to where their name and their cause was respected throughout the world. And the Fatimids were very much concerned, and very shortly after that they would go. So inshallah, in the second khutbah, we will talk about a couple of lessons that we learn from this. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. In Islamic history, we learn that there is an up and down of the state of the Muslims. And when we see that, we have to take the lessons of the examples of those when there was a rise in greatness. It was always accompanied by a spiritual rising. The people were concerned about their faith and their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And directly came as a result of that some dignity and world respect by peers and by others within the ummah. Right now we find ourselves in a time where the general education and very heavily the religious knowledge is either watered down or missing to an extent, particularly in the concept of understanding. Some people have knowledge and information, but they don't understand it and how it applies and how it might be different from time to place. When we look at this uprising, we see a group of people who are not Arab and they're not Persian, they're actually Turkish. So these were the newer Muslims that were the latest group of Muslims. So right now in the world, the newest growing group of Muslims is in the West. That is the reality right now. I think it would very much benefit us to see, hoping to build a renaissance or a reformation of the Muslims through the West, not looking through the lens of political confusion and all of that and saying, oh well, the West is this and that. How about we take our role in this country and see how the reality, obviously today we don't live in a situation where to get your point across you have to have political domination. That was the reality in the time of Alp Arslan. This is the confusion of some people when they read Islamic history and they see Muslims trying to make da'wah, and they see some Muslims that don't understand Islam, nor do they understand the reality that we live in, and they make a wrong decision. Rather, right now, the way is through education, unity, and promoting your values that people respect by seeing them, not hearing about them or reading them only, which is definitely a great influence. We need to look at ourselves and see, okay, the ummah right now is being defeated. The ummah right now is weak. What am I and my family doing to fix that? In the time of Alp Arslan, if you would have gone to any mosque for Fajr prayer, you would have seen a crowd like this. You see? If you would have asked somebody about Islamic sciences like hadith, and if you would have asked them about someone like Imam Bukhari and what is his conditions and methodology, you would have got a reasonable, basic, introductory answer. Whereas if you ask a Muslim about that now, they have no idea what you're talking about. So the knowledge, the understanding, the spiritual development and concern was there, and thus the Muslims were great and respected and honored and dignified. So right now, when we look at the motivation for seeking knowledge and understanding and participation and actualizing a good paradigm and philosophy about how to properly present our message, we see a big gap. We see a lot of Muslims living here in the West trying to recreate another country in their house or in their mosque or in their restaurant, and they don't want to see how can I integrate and become an influential force here with my peers and my neighbors, which definitely was the case in Turkmenistan with the Seljuk arising. There wasn't a group of people that were like, oh, these Seljuks, I don't know about these guys. You know, they were previously polytheists. Maybe there's something up with them. Maybe we should be suspect about the way things are here. Rather, the people moved in there, they made their reality, they built their deen, and they established who they were. And I promise you, there is fruits that will be for the whole world if the American Muslims become a very influential force in this country. But it requires work and ethic and knowledge and understanding and effort. If you drown yourself in your concern for worldly matters, and you do not realize that we are people with a specific, particular goal and message in our life, and that is to bring divine spiritual focus to the world that is moving away from that. We have to be a solution to this problem. We have all the tools within the Quran and the Sunnah, and we live in a country that says build your center, build your schools, be a part of our country. But in many cases we're very reclusive or suspect because of some political confusion. We need to remove ourselves from that confusion and be in the clarity of our purpose and our goal and our methods are clear, and they are something that is etched in the books of history as, when they're applied, very effective. Right? So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide our hearts to resurge as a great, dignified, honored people. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Muslims will return to their spiritual focus in life. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for our sinful and corrupt ways. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us to emphasize our character and morals and values in our lives, with our families, with our co-workers, with our neighbors. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us and make us a people who understand the revelation in the scripture that He revealed. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove the oppression and the lies and the misrepresentations of Islam at the hands of Muslims and non-Muslims. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that the clarity of His guidance be at our hands and at the hands of our children, that the world will see us as ambassadors for a divine spiritual cause that is valuable for all societies across the world. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us a people who take education and spiritual focus at the priority of our lives, and to remove us from a materialistic approach to life. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.